Welcome to this week's edition of Cogley and Morrow on Politics. We're glad you're able to join us today for the show, and we also want to remind you to follow us on Facebook so you get additional information about the issues and areas that we're covering, but also on SoundCloud. You can download the recordings of the shows, and you can also download podcasts of our shows each week so that you can carry them with you and listen whenever you have the opportunity. So not just here at noon on KTRL FM 90.5. So to start today's show, we are doing a focus over the coming weeks that will have a segment in each week's show looking at our community and our region and some of the challenges and issues that we are facing in the midst of the coronavirus or COVID-19 crisis. And as we've seen and we're all experiencing every day, this has an impact on so many different levels. So many facets of our lives have changed. And in the mix of all of that is the role that our government entities play on a wide range of issues, the number of issues that they have to address that are a part of this challenge. In front of us, if you turn on the news, is what's happening at the national level, sometimes what's happening at the state level, but we don't get as much information about what is going on right here in our own community. I know there are social media outlets and we've got our local newspapers, but not everybody's tuned into those. And so one of the things that we wanted to do here on Cogley and Morrow on Politics is to try to give a little more focus to some of the significant challenges that are impacting our lives, to hear from people that are in various organizations and institutions, to help us not only see those challenges and issues around us and try to understand the significance of them, how people are overcoming them, how people are working through them to continue the essential services and the essential functions that we need around us to support our everyday lives, but then also looking ahead. What are some of the things that we're going to have to consider coming out of this? What will be the impact? And I know some of that is not very clear at this moment, socially, politically, economically. We're seeing beginnings of things, but so this is going to be analyzed for months and really years. And if we think back about the 9/11 crisis and what happened following that, we can even say decades that this will have an impact. So today we turn our focus to public education. That has been an area that has been impacted from preschool all the way through university, as we know here at Tarleton State, with going online with our classes and suspending activities for the semester. But for most of our listeners in our listening area, the impact here has been on children that are in public schools, because they have had to make a tremendous adjustment here, really coming into this semester and really into the month of March without realizing and knowing what was coming. And then all of a sudden, within a matter of a few weeks, having to make a tremendous number of decisions to keep providing that public service and to keep people engaged and to try to transition what was and has been, if we look back, at the modern era, not having a disruption like this at all, what is significant in trying to continue teaching, continue students learning and engaged from home and not in a school setting. And so we want to welcome today, we have the superintendent of the Toller Independent School District, Mr. Travis Stillwell, who grew up in Azle and has been in this area for a number of decades, and has certainly been also in higher education. He's been in public education for 27 years, and in the past 21 years in administration, serving both as a high school principal, 9 years as high school principal here in Stephenville, 2 years as an intermediate principal, and then for the past 6 years he has been the superintendent at Toller. Welcome, Travis. We're glad to have you on the show today, and tell us a little bit more about your background, and then let's kind of turn to the focus on hand, and that is the challenges and the issues that you've had to address in the last month in the midst of this crisis.
Well, thank you, Eric, and I'm proud to be with you today. As far as my background, you kind of hit it there with my educational experience. I will say I'm a proud Texan. I received my both my bachelor and master's degree at Tarleton State, and my family, my daughter is going to graduate from Tarleton in May, and then my son, he plans on attending Tarleton in the fall. My wife also graduated from Tarleton State, and so we're a big Texan family. And as far as the challenges that you're talking about today, it's a obviously there are many, and we like everybody across the state, we're somewhat caught off guard by this. As we left for spring break, the word that was coming out was that this was obviously a serious situation, but we didn't realize it was going to be quite to this extent. So when we came back from spring break, or did not come back from spring break is more accurate, at the end of the week of spring break, we started hearing the news, the national news, and that the president had closed travel from Europe, and then it just continued from there. We realized how serious it was when all the sports teams and leagues were shut down, and just that this was a really serious situation. So the superintendents across the state in this area, in particular, I spoke with, was in contact with, a lot of the superintendents in the area. Everybody does a great job of helping each other out, and we bounce ideas off of each other on a regular basis, just to make sure we're all doing the best that we can. But during this situation, of course, as you can imagine, superintendents were talking rapidly, trying to figure out the best course of action. And at that time, of course, it seems like it's been a long time now, because there's so much that's transpired. But when we came out of spring break, there was no guidance from the state or from the governor, as far as if or when or if we should shut down. And pretty much everybody decided after spring break to take the cautious approach, and decided to close schools and go with a remote learning initiative, distance learning. And so immediately after spring break, we just started talking. I know I'll tell you, it literally brought me to tears at the end of the first week, just out of pure just joy and pride, for what I saw from our staff. And I can tell you that across the state and the nation, educators, I think we should be very proud of our educators, because I know when we came back from spring break, I had a Zoom conference. I haven't seen all of our teachers together since spring break, but we met via Zoom, and at that time, we gave the directive that we were going to go online in 2 days, that we were going to start on Wednesday, and I can tell you that the teachers, the teachers and the campus principals, they jumped to it, and they got it done, and so very proud of the efforts that they took, and the changes that they made in a very quick, short amount of time. In addition, another challenge with going to distance learning is the technology capabilities that your students have. And of course, all the listeners at home, everybody, we all understand this. If you have kids at home, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to have something to do the work on, a laptop or an iPad or Chromebook or something, and then Wi-Fi is a big deal. And some of the things that I know every district, again, as I talk about things that we're doing in Toller, I'm proud of our people, but I know that efforts like this have been made across the state, and other people have done other things, but we went through and contacted a local company, and they provided free Wi-Fi for some of our students who did not have Wi-Fi. Also, we went through and we added ports on the back of our high school building to create kind of a hot spot in the high school parking lot, so students could come up and do their work from the parking lot. But Wi-Fi and just technology capabilities, that's been a big issue. We also have packets, just like other districts, for students that are not able to utilize the technology. So that was a big challenge. Another challenge, of course, that all districts are dealing with is just feeding students. You know, it's that's important. You know, a lot of our families and our kids, they rely on meals from the school, and and just like every other district in Texas, have proceeded with providing meals and coming up with the procedures to do that safely. Let's see, just a lot of things, grading guidelines and policies. I know it's a big challenge, with our number one goal as a district is to create and maintain a culture of high expectations. And we've been pushing that for our educators, and they do a great job of really challenging our students. Well, now that we are in this different environment, the educational model is different. We have to temper our expectations a little bit. So that's been a challenge, and we've worked through that. Little things just like board meetings. To have a school board meeting, we can't get together. So now we did squeeze one last meeting in before all the restrictions came out. But moving forward, those will be via Zoom, and I'm hoping that's they won't last for long. That we get out of this, but we'll have to use Zoom. I wish I would have bought stock in Zoom. I know they're doing very well. Let's see, just another challenge and thing we had to overcome, just like everybody else, just work hours for faculty and staff. Whenever you're deciding essential activities, we've really had to work on what's really important and what can wait, and we've cut our hours back because of that. Fortunately, the state of Texas and our funding was not impacted through this, so very thankful for that. And we, as most districts have passed resolutions to be able to take care of our hourly employees during this time. And just the challenge of not seeing people. As educators,
right.
We're in this business. We're in a people business, and we love kids and we love teachers. And I personally, I miss seeing everybody.
Yeah, that we experienced that here on the college campus, but even in that school environment, especially think about those younger children that are being shaped by those teachers who, like you pointed out, very dedicated in making that transition and putting in the effort. But I was thinking of that and as really one of the challenging aspects of this is that yes, learning can take place, and that's going to be on a number of different levels, which I think you've got to be concerned about going forward. But just that level of interaction in activities, in sporting events, in the classroom, that to me seems one of the more significant challenges right now.
No, it is. I think we forget a lot about the interpersonal relationships that are built, and the 3 R's of education is rigor, relevance, and relationships. And right now, we can control the rigor, we can make our lessons relevant, and we can still control relationships. But there's nothing like being with people, and it's a challenge. And I know, my personal kids, as I see them, they're struggling with it. They're stir crazy and they're ready to see their friends, and just like everybody is. So that is a big challenge, and like I said, hopefully we're able to get back to normal soon, so these kids we can be together again.
Right. On the and we're hoping that's going to happen soon. I know we've got some challenging days ahead of us, but hopefully we can see that happen. I had a question, because there is a lot of information out there, or a lot of misinformation too, about different things the state has done. And this is one area I think where parents need to be informed, because you're being impacted by these decisions. So what are some of the things that have changed that would have been in the normal ebb and flow of the school year that are now either been suspended by the state or adjusted in some way?
Well, I think first and foremost, as we were making decisions on closures, of course, the governor came out, and his initial declaration were that all schools would be closed through April the 9th. Now it has been pushed forward to where all schools are closed through at least Monday, May the 4th. In addition, with UIL activities, just received an email today, and pretty much it just said we're in pause. Everything is paused. Mm-hmm. Of course, no activities, no practices or games or anything like that. So, those are decisions, and I think they were wise decisions, but those were decisions that were made that we were following.
Right, and some of I think there were other things like, of course, we know the testing. Everybody,
yes,
I mean, I think there was just a huge sigh that could be heard across the state.
That was a big one, and on testing, and you could tell in the beginning that this was something very unprecedented. Because mm-hmm. the state holds those tests very near and dear, and when the commissioner came out and said that they were suspending testing for this year, you knew that this was unlike anything we've seen before. But yes, with testing, so basically all testing STAR testing has been suspended for this year. Some things that I know kids or parents may be worried about. So let's say a kid is in Algebra 1, and typically you need to pass the Algebra 1 STAR exam to be able to graduate. Well, if that test is being waived. Mm-hmm. So if a student moves forward and they're taking geometry, they're not going to have to go back and take the Algebra 1 exam, which makes a lot of sense. If you've moved on, you don't want to have to come back and take something that you haven't been working on for a few months.
Right. Well, in that regard, where there has to be some concern about maintaining standards, as you had said earlier, where now you've got parents who are much more responsible for engaging and making sure that their child or teenager is doing what they need to be doing. Of course, we've all seen the things on social media about how the level of appreciation for teachers has increased dramatically with all of this, and people realizing, wow, is this what goes on? And I'm only doing a little bit every day or every few days, and they do this all day long. So, but on the other side of that, in coming back, I didn't know, and this is looking ahead a little bit in terms of what decisions or challenges may be there, is about how do you assess students that have gone through something like this to know that they're ready, or that they may need some additional attention in some areas to just keep moving forward. And I know that may depend by grade level or age, or elementary to junior high to high school, but this really, the obvious is this is going to create some gaps for some students and some challenges that are going to fall on school districts to address.
No, absolutely. I know that's the case. When we go through, of course, we're, like we said, we're doing our very best as far as providing educational materials at this time, but it's not quite the same as what the student generally gets when they're face-to-face in a classroom. So we know at the beginning of next year, or whenever we get back, whether it's in May or at the beginning of next year, we know that we're going to be playing catch up a little bit, and we're going to have to adjust our curriculum for some review times and to try to help those kids out and fill in the gaps where there may be some.
Right. Well, looking ahead like that, what are some of the other issues that are being discussed among superintendents? And as you look toward we've got a legislative cycle that'll be coming up this next year. But what are some of the things coming out of this that will either be, you think are direct challenges that will need to be addressed by the state, or just in terms of certain policy areas or aspects of public education that may need to be looked at or analyzed coming out of this to be better prepared in the future, saying we have another round of this or if we have another similar type of crisis?
No, I think for sure, one thing that this is a timely question. I know I've been working on our emergency operations plan this morning, and I know that in the past, with the emergency operation plans, we focused a lot on intruders and various situations like that. Pandemics, it hasn't been a major focus. I think every district, every school, every district across the state and across the nation is going to have to reevaluate and think through, number one, steps to keep our students safe, and education that we can do to help our students stay safe. And then if this occurs again, how we'll be more prepared and how do we handle that. I think, in addition, talking about the legislative cycle and where things are going and what a big concern of mine is, and of course this is a concern of everybody moving forward, is, the economy. And, it is concerning to me, what is this going to do to school funding in the future? And I think that's going to be a big issue, when you're talking a year, 2 years down the road. In 2005, if you look historically, in 2005, the legislature went through and compressed the tax rate, and at that time it went down to $1. Shortly after compressing the tax rate, there was a virus. It wasn't to this extent, I think SARS, and then also at that time they had the housing market. Everybody was they were borrowing way more than they could pay back,
right.
And the housing market crashed. Well, around 2010, 2011, there was a significant cut in school funding. Well, I hope history doesn't repeat itself, but of course, obviously, we're in unprecedented times as far as this situation and what it's going to do to the economy. And I think we've all had to be cautious and kind of prepared moving forward to be ready for that.
Right. Yeah, there are going to be adjustments on a number of fronts, and as you're seeing that at public ed and concern there, we're looking at it in higher education too, as to what the outcome will be of this in terms of resources, because it is not only a challenging crisis, but there are some changes that are going to have to happen, and usually those mean in this state you need additional resources. It's not something that you can just move things around from one area to another. And well, I really want to thank you for joining us today. I think the insight that you offer, being on the front lines in public education like that, and in an area that has been impacted tremendously already in such a short period of time, it just helps our listeners understand that, and we appreciate your leadership and what you've done, and certainly the dedication of your staff and teachers and of all of our educators across the region in trying to continue a very vital public service in our communities in the midst of just an unprecedented crisis, and certainly knowing that in the modern age like this that we have technology that's helped us to overcome some of that. but there are areas and aspects of public education that just really suffer and are not a part of that full experience that we want our children and youth to have. And so your analysis of that, and then the work going forward that we know you have and your staff and our teachers are just we appreciate the dedication that it's going to take to work through this and to continue to move forward. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Eric, thank you.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back after the break for more Cogley and Morrow on Politics.
T for Texas is a Texas-based history podcast from historian Dr. T. Lindsay Baker. Find a new episode every Thursday morning wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Cogley and Morrow on Politics. You may be wondering why it is just me today, but we will have Dr. Cogley joining us later. We are practicing social distancing here, and we'll be even moving to a format in the next few weeks where we're doing all of this by Zoom, I believe, so that we can maintain appropriate distancing and continue to offer Cogley and Morrow on Politics each week during this crisis. As a follow-up to the interview that we had with Travis Stillwell, the superintendent of Tolar ISD, we just want to thank all of our teachers, educators, and administrators out there. I think this is an area, one of the many areas that has been very challenging in the transition. It's been a very difficult challenge to turn something that is a part of our lives on a day-to-day basis and move that completely to an online environment, especially for, I think, smaller children, but just school children in general, our young people, when that face-to-face interaction is so important. And so we do want to thank all of our educators out there and the work that they're doing to keep public education in general, moving forward, whether it's at the higher education level, as we see here at Tarleton State, or in all of our regional and public school districts throughout the state and the nation. In the midst of all of this, as we've talked about each week, we do have an ongoing presidential election process. While it has been delayed in terms of primaries, there is still polling going on. There's still campaigning to a certain degree. And there's information coming out and just looking at how, in the midst of this crisis, individuals are considering what their choice for leadership for the nation and looking at the fall election. So before we move to our final segment where we'll bring in Dr. Cogley, I just wanted to bring attention to a recent Monmouth University poll. This is one of a quality polling places that does get out very engaging polls at certain times on certain things. And so a poll was released last week in looking at how the race for president has been tightening and looking at some of the factors, beginning to look at the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the election. And so there were a couple of things that we have followed in our discussions on the show related to the elections, and I wanted to look at three different things that came out in this poll that I think are significant to watch as we look at where the country is going. And I'll put this a link to this on our Facebook page so that people can go and look at the polling and the questions for yourself and just kind of analyze this and think about it in terms of what's happening in politics in the country related to the presidential election. So a couple of things with this poll that I think are quite significant. One of the major ones, and we know this has an impact on presidential elections, is how voters view their financial situation. So we're just now beginning to see people expressing the impact of this crisis on certain industries and areas that are being challenged because of loss of jobs, because of loss of revenue by certain types of companies. And so financial situation is one that, while it's on the radar in this poll just a week ago, it is showing that that fewer voters are saying that their financial situation is improving, and we can expect that trend to continue. that the financial situation for many Americans, I mean, when we see almost 10 million in the last few weeks file for unemployment, it's just unprecedented in terms of the numbers. Percentage-wise, we're not anywhere near the levels of unemployment that we saw during the Great Depression almost a century ago, but we're moving in that direction, and that's probably going to continue on the short term. So financial situation is one major factor to continue to watch, and this poll gave a little bit of attention to that. But the other two areas of data that I think are significant, one is looking at swing counties. Okay, so we know that the presidential election, while popular vote is something, and we saw in this past election, the previous election, that popular vote went to Clinton, and yet Trump won the presidency via the Electoral College. It is that Electoral College that is very critical. And so this causes us to look at not just swing states that move back and forth, that could change the total number of electoral votes that go to one candidate or another, but it's also looking at swing counties. And so a couple of things about this, and this is just to give you a little bit of information to show you how close this race is. If we look at counties across the country as a whole, in the nearly 2,500 red counties, so counties that went for Trump in 2016, he won in those counties by an average of 36 points, so significant win. His current standing for this year's election is very similar, where 63% of voters support him and 32% support Biden. So we're looking at a 31-point lead in those red counties. In the blue counties, so 360 blue counties, that Hillary Clinton won by 35 points. Okay, so a very similar spread in 2016. Right now, 60% of the voters support Biden and 30% back Trump. So we don't see a lot of movement in those counties that are either historically red or blue, at least based on the past election. However, there are about 300 what we call swing counties where the margin of victory was less than 10 points for either candidate, accounting for about 1/5 of the total U.S. electorate. So this is why this is substantial. So you're talking about 1 of every 5 voters lives in these 300 counties that are considered swing counties because the margin of difference was less than 10 points. So what we see there is that 50% of these counties of the voters in these counties back Biden, compared with 41% who backed Trump. In 2016, Clinton won the cumulative vote in these counties by just 1 percentage point. So what that data tells us is that gap has widened. That instead of it being a 1 percentage point win, Biden has about a 9 percentage point lead over Trump in these swing counties. Now, does that say Biden will win the election? No, it doesn't. It just points out that there are some key bits of information like this, drilling down into those levels to see what is actually happening. And remember, we've got a lot of months ahead of us before the election. A lot of things could happen between now and then, but these are things that we need to be tracking and watching to see where this is going. So the swing counties, that's one important area. The other one that I pulled out of this poll is looking at various constituency groups. Now, this poll looked at it by race, by education, and those are some of those groups have even smaller groups within them. Groupings, we could certainly look at age as well, which this poll does, but there are also certain groups that may be focused on certain issues or movements of some kind. And this is an area that I've said all along that we need to watch, because the more groups, constituency-type groups, that engage with this current administration and have challenges with it, the more that could add to a base of voters that swing against Trump. And so I've tracked this along the way to look at how many different groups and their size and their impact. And what this poll was showing is a couple of things that are important to look at. One is that in the overall support, when we look at race, gender, and education, The total for support for Donald Trump is 45%. Compared to 48% for Biden. So we're talking about a very tight race here at this point. But what we do see is a significant gaps when we move into certain areas. One of those areas is men of other races that are Latino. Biden leads by 14 points. In white women with no college degree, Trump leads by 37 points. White women, college graduates, Biden leads by 30 points. Women of other races and Latino, Biden leads by 63 points. So these are the kinds of things. Now, it really takes more of getting into those areas to see what the significance of that is, looking at the size of that population across the country that are of voting age. But what it's showing is that there are some there are some gaps here. And it'll be interesting as we go through this and get through the crisis and beyond, and start to be able to focus maybe back on the election and where this is heading and what are going to be the key issues in electing, either re-electing Trump for another 4 years or electing a new president, is where these go, where these numbers go in these specific constituency groups. And then what impact is that on the larger population and the larger data in looking at support for either candidate? I think it's somewhere in the middle here when you start connecting these groups by gender, age, education, and race with swing counties and looking at what impact that they may have on population vote, total vote by state, especially in swing states that could then add to the electoral count that either candidate may receive. But we'll be looking at that in more detail and trying to track that as we move toward the general election and trying to look at the numbers and what's happening across the country with voters who are viewing viewing the candidates and trying to make their decision for how they're going to vote come November. We're going to take a very short break, and when we come back, we will have Dr. Cogley with us, and we're going to talk a little bit. We're going to move outside the United States, and we're going to talk about the impact of the coronavirus in Africa, an area of the world that Dr. Cogley himself has spent a significant amount of time. We'll be right back.
Politics can be confusing, but Cogley and Morrow have your back. Follow them on Facebook. Search Cogley and Morrow On Politics to stay up to date with the show and for all of the sources to follow right along. Cogley and Morrow is a production of the Tarleton Radio Network.
Welcome back to Cogley and Morrow On Politics. For our last segment today, we do have Dr. Cogley back with us. As I said earlier in the show, we're practicing social distancing, and we're hoping to move that into a Zoom or online environment very soon. But until we do, we have you on like a guest here today. Right. And but the topic that we want to discuss is something that's kind of moving outside of our boundaries of our own community, state, and nation, where we've been very focused on what's happening here now with the onslaught and the growth of and spread of the coronavirus, to look at this on an international level and maybe a part of the world that a lot of people have in our region, our listeners, have not thought about or really looked at, because up until the present, the spread was not that significant of the virus in Africa. But this is a part of the world that you have spent a tremendous amount of time and certainly research, and you teach a course in African politics. And so it's something we wanted to give some attention to as to what's happening related to the virus and what that might tell us in terms of where this thing is going.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm not offended that I've been demoted from co-host to special guest, under the circumstances. Yeah, I've been to 26 African countries, spent several years, currently teaching African politics class. We've also had guest experts. Our own Dr. Zubair from Nigeria and Dr. Banda from Malawi come in as special guests. So of course the coronavirus is a worldwide pandemic, and it's affecting every region. There's this map that's getting a lot of coverage, the Johns Hopkins coronavirus case map that's live updated with cases from every country. I think CNN's been showing the map on its news, and Fox as well. And it looks on that map as if Africa is less affected at this moment. That may be true. It may have had a later introduction onto the continent, but also reliable data out of Africa has always been a challenge. So these are kind of the official cases that have been registered by the government. So it may be lower now, but it may also just be there's going to be data challenges here as you go forward. Africa has some advantages dealing with coronavirus, but also some disadvantages.
Right. Well, and that part of it too, I think, is always for our listeners is understanding that Africa is a very, very diverse continent. The levels of government and their ability to address this and to engage with it and then to report that kind of information, some of them are very challenged in that.
Absolutely. There's 54 recognized sovereign states in Africa. It's not unified on a continental level. These are sovereign nation states with their own presidents and militaries, what have you. So on the positive, something that Africa has that may be an advantage in dealing with this, it has a younger population distribution. So when we look at the population distribution in Europe or America, there's that baby boom generation. Population peaks out in the 40s, 50s, 60s, whereas Africa has a traditional pyramid population distribution. So the oldest of the population are the lowest percentage of the population by far, and then the youngest are the biggest percent, very pyramid. The amount of Africans that are over 80 is very low, less, a fraction of a percent. The amount of Africans that are over 70 is very low, lower life expectancy and higher birth rates in Africa. So because this virus does affect older people with much more mortality rate, Africa has a younger population distribution. That means, the mortality rate might be less. There's also this very interesting dynamic about weather. We see that the common flu is seasonal here in the U.S. It peaks during the cold months. Africa tends to be a warmer continent. What's interesting, as I've been reading up on why it's so seasonal in the U.S., the medical experts aren't exactly sure, and it'd be nice to get maybe, Dr. Edwards back to kind of, give a more scientific answer to this. But some people feel there is some temperature dynamics to the spread of this type of virus. But others feel it results from behavior that itself is affected by temperature. So in cold weathers, people tend to go indoor and shut the windows more and large crowds indoors can help spread the virus. So it's unclear if this is temperature related or behavioral. If there is some temperature component where the virus struggles to spread in warmer climates, that would be good for Africa, although some African countries have temperate climates like South Africa, which is pretty far from the border. Africa's advantage with this later introduction seems to have, it's coming out of China and got introduced to Europe and North America rather quickly, and maybe was introduced to Africa later. And also in the media, there's this talk about perhaps malaria medicine is effective in treating it. And malaria medicine is widely available in Africa, and having traveled and bought malaria medication in Africa, it's available without a prescription at the local pharmacy. So that may be an advantage. But having said these advantages, there's going to be many more disadvantages I'd be happy to go over.
Yeah, one of the concerns, I think, early on when we were looking at this with especially study abroad programs to other parts of the world that might have higher poverty levels and maybe less health care infrastructure. I can see that in Central America, Costa Rica, and in a few places. But what about in Africa? Where when you look at the continent as a whole, and again, this may come down to looking at specific regions or even countries themselves, is that really a challenge when you do have areas that may not have adequate access to health care or health resources, or you may have high concentrations of population that may not have either that level of separation or really the resources to combat this?
Oh, absolutely. So that was kind of my short list of what the advantages they might have, and there's a longer list of maybe disadvantages. So one of the disadvantages is really the challenge of social distancing in Africa. You do have some affluent communities, but that would be much more rare. There's a lot of close living quarters, many people living in a shared space. This can happen both in a poor urban setting like a slum environment, or even out in the rural communities. You have these villages with kind of communal living spaces, even a communal water source, a communal bathroom arrangement. So a lot of close living quarters where people live together. The challenge of social distancing just based on the living standards. Also, there's a lack of education amongst the general population. Trying to explain how some invisible microscopic thing is the concern that you won't even get symptoms for several days is a challenge to try to get understanding through the population, and then also follow through of a population with less education on the recommended sanitary guidelines. Poverty also means there's a lack of savings for a rainy day. A lot of people need to work immediately to provide for their family immediately. The income of the day is spent on the food of the day, and so the ability to kind of just bunker down at home for a month is very limited. Also, there's at the country level, there's a lack of testing capacity, which is a problem we've seen elsewhere, but also a lack of critical care capacity in the national hospitals, especially those ventilators. USA doesn't have enough ventilators, let alone some of these developing countries with much less healthcare capacity. And I would say in terms of like a government response, we see in the USA, the Congress taking action in terms of, distributing some funds. There is no lack of demand for African currencies on the international market. So if the government's going to create more currency available, that would lead directly to inflation. It won't be sucked up by other countries. And so another thing is that these more developed countries oftentimes will help Africa in certain global pandemics, but these developed countries really need to focus on themselves right now. Their priority is themselves. And you study nationalism and national self-interest. They're willing to help Africa, but the focus might be on themselves for the immediate future.
Right. That was one of my concerns in that this has hit other areas first. And so even resources that are gathered at the global level are being challenged to meet where this crisis is at the moment, and will there even be any resources left if this thing rolls through other continents and areas in a significant way? And that's something that we've yet to see. We just don't know the outcome of this on the long-term scale and what the impact will be on areas that certainly may not be able to address the crisis in the ways that the United States or even countries in Europe or even China have been able to do.
Yeah, and you can imagine maybe in the long term, as the U.S. and Europe increases their production of ventilators and masks and what have you, at some point when this thing's under control, they may have a surplus and may be able to help out African countries. But in the short term, they don't have enough to meet their own demands. One final challenge, and we're kind of going to experience this in the USA too, is the political challenges. There were a lot of important elections set up this year in Africa. There's a number of countries that are going to have presidential elections. Malawi was expecting to have one in July. Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Ghana, Ivory Coast. There's quite a number of countries that have scheduled major elections to take place this year. And of course, they have more of the traditional wait in line, show up in person, cast your vote systems of elections, and fraud is always a concern. Whether or not how much of it is going on, that might be disputed between the different political parties. But it's going to be a challenge to execute these elections in this environment, and there is kind of a legitimate reason to maybe delay or alter the elections, but there might be concern by the other party that that's an excuse. So this health pandemic can lead to these kind of political disputes as elections become disturbed.
Right, in a country that has regularly had challenges with these kinds of power transitions, which I think is an area of your research that's significant. I mean, anytime a pattern that's been established and that has to be disrupted in some way, that just opens the door to the possibilities of instability in some way or another. So I'm sure that has to be a concern in many countries.
Yeah, Malawi has a runoff scheduled for July, and July, is coming in a couple months. The president had come in first place in the first round, but was going to be forced by the courts to a runoff between the top two, and people were thinking the opponent was actually strong. The opponent was poised to win this runoff, but now the president has a very legitimate reason to maybe try to delay the elections. And of course, the opponent will look at this as he's using an excuse to delay the election. So you can see how this naturally is going to lead to some political disputes. And with 54 countries, every year there's presidential elections, parliamentary elections going on the continent. This is going to be tough to execute, especially with something like mail-in ballots is not a norm on that continent.
Right. I think this helps our listeners and all of us here in Central Texas to really have a global perspective of the impact of this crisis. And we've seen it all the way in this show today, from local school districts to Africa. It's just significant, and why people need to be engaged with resources, news, and information that help them to understand and see this around the world, and how it is impacting lives, and be a part of the discussion about the solutions and changes, and really overcoming this and working through it, and being prepared in the future. So thank you, Nathaniel, for joining us for today, and we'll look forward to our show for next week. We're hoping to welcome the director of the Stephenville Economic Development Association to talk about economic issues here in our community in the region. We thank you today for joining us on Cogley and Morrow on Politics on 90.5 KTRL FM.
This has been a Tarleton Radio Network podcast with production from AJ Heyer and Taylor Welch. Find more great shows by searching Tarleton Radio Network wherever you get your podcasts.